11 investigators, 2 countries, nearly 40 years, and every single one of them reached the same conclusion: the case was, in their words, effectively closed. Not solved. Closed. There's a difference, and that difference is the entire reason you're here. Because this week, someone did something no investigator had bothered to do in 4 decades. They didn't interview a new witness. They didn't reopen a tomb. They simply requested the Vatican's own internal records, the paperwork the institution kept on itself. And what those documents say does not match a single official statement made since the summer of 1983. Her name was Emanuela Orlandi, 15 years old, the daughter of a Vatican employee, a man who worked inside the walls of the smallest sovereign state on earth. On the evening of June 22, 1983, she left a music lesson near the Piazza Sant'Apollinare in Rome. She called her sister from a payphone. She mentioned a man had approached her about a sales job for a cosmetics company. The conversation was ordinary, almost boring. Then she hung up and she was never seen again. Think about where she lived. Not a remote village, not a lawless border town. She was a resident of Vatican City, a place with its own police force, its own intelligence apparatus, and a population small enough that nearly everyone knows everyone. A teenage girl connected to that world simply evaporated on a busy Roman street. Within days, the case attracted attention at a level most disappearances never reach. Phone calls came in, demands were made, and the explanations offered to the Orlandi family began, almost immediately, to contradict each other. The family was told to wait, to trust the process, to believe the people in charge knew more than they were saying. As it turns out, they did. Here's where most people assume this story goes: a predator, a stranger, a tragedy. Sad but ordinary. Now throw that out. Because within weeks of Emanuela's disappearance, the case collided with something nobody planning a routine missing persons investigation could have predicted. A man called the Vatican directly and offered a trade. He would return the girl in exchange for the release of Mehmet Ali Agca. That name should stop you cold. Agca was the Turkish gunman who, 2 years earlier, had shot Pope John Paul II 4 times in St. Peter's Square. Suddenly, a 15-year-old's vanishing wasn't a local crime. It was leverage in an international standoff involving an assassination attempt on the most protected man alive. The pattern interrupt is this: the people investigating a missing teenager were no longer looking for a kidnapper. They were negotiating with someone they believed had connections to a global conspiracy. And the moment a case becomes that politically dangerous, something strange happens to the truth. It stops being something to uncover. It becomes something to manage. That distinction, uncovering versus managing, is the thread that runs through everything that followed. Over the following decades, the case was examined, reopened, examined again. Italian magistrates took it on. Vatican officials weighed in. Investigative journalists chased leads across Europe. And one by one, 11 separate official efforts each reached the same dead end. Not a conviction, not a body, not a confession that held up under scrutiny. Each investigation concluded, in effect, that there was nothing more to find. Consider what that requires. To close a case 11 times, you need 11 groups of people to look at the same evidence and decide the questions weren't worth asking anymore. Some pointed to organized crime, the Banda della Magliana, a powerful Roman criminal syndicate, was repeatedly named. Some pointed to financial scandals tied to the Vatican Bank, the troubled institution at the center of more than one mysterious death in that era. Some quietly suggested the girl had simply run away, despite no evidence supporting it. What unites all 11 conclusions isn't an answer, it's the absence of one. They didn't agree on what happened to Emanuela Orlandi. They agreed only that they would stop asking, and for years that held, until a tomb was opened on live television and turned the entire story inside out. In 2019, an anonymous tip arrived at the Orlandi family. It pointed to a specific grave inside the Teutonic Cemetery, a small burial ground located within Vatican City itself. A statue of an angel marked the spot. The tip suggested Emanuela's remains were hidden there. Remarkably, the Vatican agreed to open it. Cameras were present, the family watched, and when the tomb was unsealed, it was empty, not partially, completely. The remains of the two 19th century princesses supposedly buried there were gone, too. No bones, no coffins, nothing. Now sit with that. They opened a centuries-old grave inside the Vatican expecting to find one missing person, and instead discovered that two other documented bodies had also vanished without record. The investigation pivoted. Thousands of bone fragments were eventually recovered from nearby ossuaries during the search. They were tested. None belonged to Emanuela. The tomb that was supposed to provide answers had created new ones, and the Vatican, the institution that controlled access to that ground, suddenly had to explain not where Emanuela was, but where two other bodies had gone. That question was never satisfactorily answered, and it sat unresolved until this week. Here is the part the 11 investigations never reckoned with. The Vatican is not just a place. It is an archive. It keeps records on itself with an obsessive, bureaucratic precision. Internal memos, financial logs, correspondence, dossiers. And when investigators finally pressed for access to those internal files, the contents did not match the public timeline anyone had been working from. Statements made to the Orlandi family in 1983, that nothing was known, that no information existed, were contradicted by documents indicating the institution had been tracking the case far more closely than it ever admitted. A dossier reportedly surfaced detailing expenditures connected to the case, suggesting money had moved in ways that were never disclosed. The gap is the story. For decades, officials said one thing publicly while their own paperwork said another. The investigators who closed the case 11 times were working from the public version. The truth was sitting in a filing system the whole time, not hidden in a forest, not buried in a tomb, but written down, signed, and stored by the very people offering reassurances. The most unsettling discoveries are rarely dramatic. Sometimes they're just a folder that proves someone always knew. Through all of it, one person refused to let the case close. Pietro Orlandi, Emanuela's brother. For 40 years he has shown up, asked questions, pushed for documents, and demanded that the institution his family served explain what it knew. He has been dismissed, stonewalled, and accused of obsession. But it was that obsession, that refusal to accept 11 closures, that kept the pressure on long enough for the records to finally surface. In 2023, the Vatican opened a new internal investigation, its first ever into the case. Italy's parliament launched a separate inquiry. Pietro has stated publicly that he believes people inside the Vatican have always known what happened to his sister. The discoveries this week appear to support exactly what he's been saying for decades. There's a particular cruelty in that. A family told to trust the process, only to learn the process was the thing standing between them and the truth. Every reassurance was a delay. Every closure was a door quietly shut. And the man who kept knocking was treated as the problem, when he was, all along, the only one still asking the right question. Step back from Emanuela for a moment and ask a harder question. How does a case get closed 11 times without being solved? The answer isn't conspiracy. It's something quieter and more common. Cases close because the people empowered to keep them open lose the will, the funding, or the protection to continue. They close because a witness recants, a lead goes cold, a budget cycle ends. And they close because the institutions involved decide, somewhere in a meeting that leaves no record, that the cost of knowing exceeds the cost of not knowing. Emanuela Orlandi's disappearance touched an assassination attempt, a criminal syndicate, and a financial scandal, 3 things any institution would prefer to leave undisturbed. So it was managed, not solved. 11 times. The documents that emerged this week don't necessarily reveal a single villain. What they reveal is a system that found it easier to maintain a story than to follow the facts. That's the part that should stay with you. Not the missing girl alone, but the realization that the truth was never lost. It was filed, stored, preserved by the only people who could have shared it and chose for 40 years not to. So where does that leave us? A 15-year-old girl walked home from a music lesson on June 22, 1983, and never arrived. 11 investigations declared there was nothing left to find. A tomb was opened and found empty, along with 2 bodies that should have been there. And this week, the institution at the center of it all was confronted with its own records, which tell a story different from every public statement it ever made. We still don't know what happened to Emanuela Orlandi. But we now know something arguably more disturbing. For 4 decades, the gap between what was said and what was written was never investigated, because no one looked in the one place the truth was actually kept. The 11 who closed the case weren't lied to in the simple sense. They were given a version, and the real version was sitting in a drawer the entire time, waiting for someone to ask for the file instead of the answer. The case is open again now. The question is whether anyone will finish reading what's inside, or whether it becomes the 12th time someone decides it's better not to know. Emanuela Orlandi has been missing for over 40 years, and the truth may have been on paper the whole time. Here's my question for you. When an institution investigates itself, can a case ever really be closed? Tell me in the comments. If this is the kind of story the mainstream leaves out, subscribe to Obscura Files and turn on notifications. The next file is already open, and you'll want to be here when it does.